Avalara. Hey, Will.
Hey, good afternoon. All
Welcome to
right.
GP Demo Day. Are you ready?
Yes, doing well. Thank you. And let's pull this up so we can kind of get started. Hopefully, you guys can see my presentation.
I can.
All right. So today we wanted to focus on talking about the automation of consumers use tax with Avalara within GP. So we have, certainly want to make sure that, as we're kind of going through this, we're just kind of given broad information. It's not really tax advice. But as we go through, really Avalara has been built here to really alleviate that burden of all your different tax compliance. So we've been around since 2004. In general, we're making somewhere in the neighborhood of about 48 billion different calls to tax engines for people that are trying to calculate their various kinds of sales tax with different transactions. We One of the things that is really important these days is to talk about the creation of consumers use tax and that calculation. So there's a lot of different scenarios where things aren't going to come in. So it's that tax that's owed by the buyer when you're not taxing that full amount, from that purchaser or seller. So perhaps that out-of-state vendor didn't collect any sales tax from you. Or maybe you bought it so you can, put it in inventory for resale, but instead you used it or you actually consumed it internally. These are situations where you're going to need to actually calculate that tax and then self-assess and report those out to different states. So there are lots of different challenges around those different things, lots of complexities, even more so than on the sales tax side of the world. I mean, there are errors that could be happening on those different vendor invoices, and we need to be able to correct those. So maybe they only charge you $10, and it really should have been 15, right? So we still need to self-assess that $5. Again, maybe we bought them in one place, but we're actually utilizing things like in the construction industry to multiple different points of usage, right? All those different kind of calculations need to be taken care of so that ultimately we get those out for the GL accruals and those different sales tax returns from a filing perspective. So, really kind of looking through and just trying to make sure, are those suppliers charging the correct amount of sales tax? Are we calculating any overpayments? Right, and trying to capture those components. So maybe we need to go back to those vendors and figure out, why they're charging you so much. Are you self-accruing those things when the vendors aren't charging you sales tax? Are these kind of things slowing down your actual payment process, as you're kind of going through with the different states? So there's a lot of ways to kind of automate behind the scenes with these different things. So that's where our AvaTax for Accounts Payable comes in. So it's attached into the AvaTax tax engine that runs within the background. So we're just essentially a plugin on the backside from GP calculation. It can help you go through and calculate those different amounts, whether you're overcharged, whether you're undercharged. We can also handle Canadian PST for those different things. It helps, and again, it's all centralized within the Avalara tax engine. So we're here behind the scenes to kind of capture and again, treat these things for different reporting and ultimately get those out to the different jurisdictions. And again, we're tied in. So there's other applications that we've got within the Avalara suite of products. So whether we're looking at vendor exemptions or we're looking at returns and the reporting aspects of things, all this information can flow right from GP into the actual end process to get out to the different states. So again, we're trying to treat this as more of a centralized system. And there's different ways that we can handle logic built in here, depending on how you're configuring the different systems. So we can build in vendor behavior in here to say, hey, these certain vendors I want to skip over. Just, whatever they calculated is good. Maybe we want to just auto accrue and just have it pushed right through. We can choose to go through and review those transactions before they ultimately accrue, right, and get into the returns. You can build logic routes, cost centers. You can build different things around allocations. So we can hard code things in to say, hey, when these particular components come in, they're always going to split out to these couple of different locations, right, and get that ultimate point of usage. So again, a lot of different ways that we can kind of drive that logic and be able to push forward with the different components. So behind the scenes, again, we've got a lot of different areas that we can talk to, as it ties directly into the GP. We have AvaTax that is our main, tax engine. Within that is kind of also our accounts payable module to be able to handle the AP side of things. We have cross-border products. We have back calculation. We can handle exemption certificates as well, as those come through, and ultimately those filing, to kick out to different jurisdictions. So a lot of other platforms and solutions that we can provide within the actual Avalara suite of products. But today we're going to talk about our kind of accounts payable side of things. So what I'm going to try to pull up here is my actual GP instance, and where we tie in from the actual AP side, we are built into on the receiving transactions entries. So the intent when we get put into the systems is basically just don't get in the way of your day to day. So as you're building out the different, whether it's a sales order or invoice on the sales side, or we're kind of working on these essentially vendor bills as they come in here, the intent is, again, just allow you to go in, build out your normal transactional information just like you normally would, right? And drive this different information through. It is leveraging the logic within the Avalara system for all the different goods and services and all those other components to know kind of at a high level, do we have nexus in that state? Is there, is the customer and or vendor, were they exempt? What about that actual good or service? Is it taxable? Is it exempt? Maybe there's reduced rates thresholds. All of those different things are going to play in a role as far as the transaction. And the intent here is that as we are calling out and making these different decisions, these are real-time calls back and forth to the systems so that we are not getting in the way of the actual process, right? But the intent here is, with the AP side, you've got the system kind of coming through and calculating whatever that base tax was. We apply within here this ability to kind of verify that out. So this will call to my AvaTax engine and it will recognize, depending on how I've got things kind of mapped in behind the scenes, right? In this particular case, I was way overcharged, right? So they charged me, $960. It called to the AvaTax engine behind the scenes, and however I've got this particular good or service mapped, or maybe there's a certificate or some rules built in that there should have been no tax in this particular processor that I purchased, but it has identified this different piece. So in this scenario, I would want to go back to my vendor and figure out what's going on there. If I had been undercharged, it will give you messaging to let me know that, hey, you've been undercharged, and this is really what the tax should be. Depending on how we've set those vendors up on the AvaTax backend, it can give us, again, different information to drive those things, again, whether they're set up for review or those other things. When I post this information, so I post this transaction through, ultimately it will end up on my consumer. So this is the backend portal from AvaTax. Ultimately, it will end up in here, and I'm going to be able to see that invoice number that we sent through, that reporting period, that doc date, what that status is that we've built it in, right? So again, depending on how we've aligned our different vendor logic and those kind of components, there's an amount that we would have sent through. I can tell whether or not it was taxable or not based on the actual goods or services that we aligned. You have the ability to tell us what the actual tax is within the GP side. So whatever you actually paid, whether it was zero or some other number. When it calls the AvaTax, that's the value that it calculated, right? And ultimately, whatever that variance is, right? So I know in this particular case, I've got an unpaid tax that I've got to take care of for about $140. So it's driving all this information almost in a staging area as you kind of run it through, right? And we have the ability in here again to see and potentially go through and determine how do I want to actually accrue these? Do I want to, just kind of leave it in more of an ignore state? So it's kind of just setting it off to the side. So you've got the ability to work further with these AP transactions, but you can take things, for example, right? We've got all the jurisdictional breakdowns based on my different ship fronts and ship twos. If we've decided, hey, there's a point of usage in here that we're actually using this in a couple of different areas, we can split these different lines out depending on different addresses that you may have set up in the system. So I can say, for example, we'll go to Texas and Colorado. We'll save our details. I will do a recalculation here. This will allow me to split out that one line that I sent in, right? And then appropriately use these, put these at the point of usage so that I can get them ultimately at the point of returns from the filing perspective. So it's helping me to drive all these different consumers use calculations as we would run through the system, and then ultimately, get these down the line, within the system. All the rates are updated by us. All the product taxabilities are updated by us, kind of behind the scenes. It's just a matter of getting those different pieces and components aligned. So again, lots of things happen under the hood, giving you some additional tools here to be able to kind of drive through and run with the information as you've got it. But again, small piece of the overall picture, but definitely an important part of getting things into the actual systems. So I think, from that point, that's really kind of the behind the scenes. Definitely, if you guys are interested in getting more details, there's a QR code that you can kind of scan, and that'll get you in a meeting with one of our tax specialists. We can get those kind of conversations going on what might be the needs from a tax calculation standpoint, whether it's sales use, reporting, et cetera. And then if you've got other questions, we are on the app source as well, but you can also send emails over to Microsoft at avalara.com.